important that is about to be presented to you. As a collective of Black people, we have endured trauma pretty much dating back, as we know, to 1619. But it's not just us that are dealing with trauma and drama. It seems that our society is still reeling from the pandemic. And we don't want to have uncomfortable conversations about how we're dealing with trying to find a place. There are funerals on top of funerals. There are young people who are dying. There are older people who are dying. There are people who are committing murders and suicides, and sometimes they do it all at the same time. There are people who have road rage and are willing to jump out their car and beat you with a bat because you cut them off. We have to talk about these things instead of thinking that we can't have an open conversation, so we self-medicate. How do we self-medicate? We self-medicate with, number one, alcohol. Number two, now that cannabis is legal, oh my goodness, we popping gummies and chocolate bears and all kinds of things, and all at the same time too, sometimes. And for others, we self-medicate through sex, too much, none, and sometimes everything in between. We self-medicate with shopping, and it's not just the women. So typically we talk about the women, like they are addicted to shopping. Well, right now, because you can do everything online, everybody is addicted to shopping online. We got to call it like it is, right? And so and then with the young people, we're so quick to talk about their issues, but we don't want to look at ourselves. And so today we get a chance to look at ourselves. We asked two experts, right? Because we know that we can all talk about our opinions and different things like that, but we asked two community experts. When I say community experts, they're experts in their field and they're willing to share their expertise with the community. And so I want to introduce them to you. They asked me, what do you want us to talk about? And I asked the executive committee. The executive committee gave some thoughts, and then we gave them some more thoughts, but we want this to be an open forum. If you have questions, you can put them in the chat. I would ask Vice President Johnson to monitor our Facebook chat. And if you see questions come up, to let us know, as well as those members. Oh, we self-medicate by speeding around, making a lot of noise too. But those of you who are in the Zoom link, if you have a question, please feel free to put it in the chat. And so our presenters are Doctors Monique Swift and Dr. Juan. And I want to read their information so that you are aware that you're not talking to your mother, you're not talking to your sister. I mean, sister, brother, but you are talking to people who are experts in this field. We need to have real hard conversations. So Dr. Monique Swift, she has a doctorate in clinical psychology. She graduated with distinction. So she has a master's and she also has a BA. But as a doctor, she's clinical psychology. Her licenses and certifications include she is a certified clinical trauma professional, trauma-informed response trainer, clinical supervisor. She has and a crisis intervener. Now, she did presentations, trauma-informed, based on
with the PTA, getting schools involved in PTA.
We see that as being extremely important to assist schools in reactivating PTAs. And in our conversation, we discovered that one of our members is actually on the state board for the PTA. And so you will be hearing more about the PTA. You will be hearing more about the PTA in the coming months. The activism has to be from the ground up. There's a lot of decisions and policies that are made from the top down, but the ground up is where the action and the work takes place. Also, our environmental justice chair, she's not on. Her name is Asada Rashidi, and we're going to ask that she sends out some additional information. They are in need of people being made more aware of our environment, the pollutants in our environment, the toxicity in our environment. It's not just in our minds, but it's also the air that we're breathing, the water that we're drinking, the food that we're eating. All of that plays a part on our total health. And so the environmental justice chair is also affiliated with the South Ward Environmental Alliance, as well as the State Environmental Alliance. And based on her affiliation, what we're doing in Newark is we are collaborating. We don't think that we have all the answers and we can do all the work by ourselves. So you'll hear us talk about other entities that we have reached out to say, can we work together? That is the only way. There is so much work to be done that we must learn how to work together to make the dent, to get some of the work done. And our AXO chair is actually preparing for another show. She is a drama teacher, but she asked me to say to you that last Saturday, there was a culinary arts competition held at Newark Vocational High School. And the Newark branch is the only branch in the state that has a culinary arts competition. I don't know if Tracy Mumford is on, that she documented all of it, and it is on our Facebook page with the winners. We want to publicly thank all of the judges, Judge Messenger, Judge Jesse Jones, and Judge Monique Johnson. They gave of their time, and we are certainly thankful for that they were able to give of their time. Now, what I would like to do is to introduce our guest speakers. So this information is so important that is about to be presented to you. As as a collective of Black people, we have endured trauma pretty much dating back, as we know, to 1619. But it's not just us that are dealing with trauma and drama. It seems that our society is still reeling from the pandemic. And we don't want to have uncomfortable conversations about how we're dealing with trying to find a place. There are funerals on top of funerals. There are young people who are dying. There are older people who are dying. There are people who are committing murders and suicides, and sometimes they do it all at the same time. There are people who have road rage and are willing to jump out their car and beat you with a bat because you cut them off. We have to talk about these things instead of thinking that we can't have an open conversation, so we self-medicate. How do we self-medicate? We self-medicate with, number one, alcohol. Number two, now that cannabis is legal, oh my goodness, we popping gummies and chocolate bears and all kinds of things, and all at the same time too, sometimes. And for others, we self-medicate through sex, too much, none, and sometimes everything in between. We self-medicate with shopping, and it's not just the women. So typically we talk about the women, like they are addicted to shopping. Well, right now, because you can do everything online, everybody is addicted to shopping online. We got to call it like it is, right? And so and then with the young people, we're so quick to talk about their issues, but we don't want to look at ourselves. And so today we get a chance to look at ourselves. We asked two experts, right? Because we know that we can all talk about our opinions and different things like that, but we asked two community experts. When I say community experts, they're experts in their field and they're willing to share their expertise with the community. And so I want to introduce them to you. They asked me, what do you want us to talk about? And I asked the executive committee. The executive committee gave some thoughts, and then we gave them some more thoughts, but we want this to be an open forum. If you have questions, you can put them in the chat. I would ask Vice President Johnson to monitor our Facebook chat. And if you see questions come up, to let us know, as well as those members. Oh, we self-medicate by speeding around, making a lot of noise too. But those of you who are in the Zoom link, if you have a question, please feel free to put it in the chat. And so our presenters are Doctors Monique Swift and Dr. and Juan. And I want to read their information so that you are aware that you're not talking to your mother, you're not talking to your sister. I mean, sister, brother, but you are talking to people who are experts in this field. We need to have real hard conversations. So Dr. Monique Swift, she has a doctorate in clinical psychology. She graduated with distinction. So she has a master's and she also has a BA. But as a doctor, she's clinical psychology. Her licenses and certifications include She is a certified clinical trauma professional, trauma-informed response trainer, clinical supervisor. She has and a crisis intervener. Now, she did presentations, trauma-informed, based on the information that she can share as a panelist, and also having written some papers. Trauma-informed care with, she's consulted with Newark Beth Israel, so hospitals, government agencies, the city of Newark and Newark Public Schools. And of course, she has come into the community as a training consultant. Talk to students as well as adults. Dr. Juan Rios, he has a doctorate degree in social work from Rutgers University. He is a licensed clinical social worker, a certified sex offender treatment specialist, an EMDR therapist, and he'll have to tell you what that is. He is currently a full-time professor at Seton Hall University. He has studied the traumatic effects of migration and issues surrounding masculinity and depression. And his publications on mental health and policing have reached national platforms and raised important questions around wellness and safety. He has extensive experience in both private mental health and government agencies. Oh, and I wanted to say, let me circle back with Dr. Swift. She is the owner of Swift Solutions Consultant Services, which is a private practice that she has in Scotch Plains. She's done a lot of other things, but we want to hear from them. And so I would ask you, the agenda said that you talk separately about something that you need the public to know. And then you also have questions and answers. But there's a question that I put, it was a tough question, and I don't know if you all saw that tough question, right? And so I'm going to put the tough question out front so that people can know that by the end of this is not a consultant session. You are not going to get all your problems solved in the next few moments that we get to share. Please don't look at this as counseling. We have a disclaimer from the door, right? That if you have issues that are having an impact on you, you hear voices of command, then you need to go to the hospital, right? This is not, as the young people say, this is not that part, okay? It is not. But some of the questions that some of the tips and the tools that we hope that you come away from this is some website resources where you can get some more information about mental health and getting help. How to know when a therapist fits you, because you can go to a therapist and just because you tried it once, oh, that doesn't work. That doesn't work. Nope, doesn't work. That may not have been the fit for you. Your depression is still there. Your addiction is still there. Or your trauma is still there. And we need whole, healthy people in our community. And we have them. And so those of you who are whole and healthy, there's always room for more wholeness. There's always room for more healthiness. And so it's not about pointing fingers and blaming others. It's none of that. And another question that they may be able to answer is, how do we convince ourselves or a family member to seek professional help? Because we have been trained, and now when I say we, Black people in particular, we have been trained not to air dirty laundry out in the public, even though our behaviors show the dirty laundry. So I'm going to ask, I'm going to pull both Dr. Swift and Dr. Rios. Hello.
Hello,
How
hello.
are
Good
you?
evening.
Thank you,
Doing
thank you,
well.
thank you so much for coming on. And I know I said a whole mouthful, right?
Yes, you did.
But
Yes,
but
you did.
there is more to say. And why don't we do it this way? Dr. Swift, you might want to make some opening remarks. Dr. Rios make some opening remarks, and then we have that conversation about some of the things that I kind of touched on. Does that work?
Um, okay, well, I prepared a presentation, a brief presentation. Dr. Rios did
Oh,
also.
okay. What do you need? You need to share the screen?
Yeah, if we could do that, that'd be
Ooh.
great.
Oh, she's challenging me. Oh, let me see. Okay. I think you can share the screen, but
Okay.
here's the thing. Because I
Mhm.
spotlighted you, I don't know if you can still share the screen. So
Well,
let's
let's give it a try. It looks like
try.
I can.
Woo, woo.
There we
Yes.
go. All right.
Yes. All right. Thank you.
Sure thing. All right, we're gonna get over to, all right. So this should look familiar to folks, right? I'm sorry, are we seeing the share okay? And can
Yes.
you hear me?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
perfect.
Mhm.
All right, I'm just trying to move some boxes. So again, this flyer looks familiar. So good evening, everybody. Thank you, um, President Deborah Smith Gregory. I appreciate you, and really just wanted to start off thanking you for hosting this evening. This program to amplify the importance of mental health. It is so evident to me in your introduction and how you set the table that you really get it. And the fact that we're here also indicates the fact that you get it. And I appreciate that of you. Dr. Rios and I are very grateful to have been invited to present to you all this evening, because whether it is acknowledged or not, he and I both know that mental health is an integral and an inextricable aspect of our overall wellness. So I wanted to just kind of start kind of connecting on us with the fact that sometimes we will claim, right, that we're well, right? We're well because we went to the doctor and our vitals were in normal range and we have no real physical complaints or ailments. And yet we're stressed out, right? We're unable to concentrate. We're in deep conflict with those around us. We're dissatisfied with many aspects of our life. So just not living to our fullest potential. And so tonight is about taking a moment, a pause to reflect on our mental health. And when it comes to the mental health of Black people, really, what most threatens our mental health, I find, is stress, right? We're going to talk more about that as we go along. But the thing that I wanted to say up front is that if we hold too much of it for too long, it can become what we call traumatic stress, right? And that's what I wanted to talk to us about this evening is the traumatic stress. So I've titled my portion of our topic, A Legacy of Traumatic Stress. So I'm going to talk a little bit about trauma, traumatic stress, and then I'm going to kind of hone in on a specific type of trauma that attends being Black in America. And then Dr. Rios is going to come and he's going to provide us with some, also some ideas of ways how we can show up in the world in a, a way that promotes our agency, our power to protect ourselves, right? So we're going to jump right in here. Very often when I say the word trauma, most people typically think of these events that I have listed here, because kind of the major outlier events that tend to cause pretty visibly drastic impacts on our lives. And of course, these are potentially traumatizing events, but an event that causes traumatic stress is not always big, visible, and overwhelming, right? And you may be wondering, how can an event that by itself is not major cause an impact like trauma, which is major? And to help us better understand how a minor stress can become a traumatic stress, I want us to consider this glass of water, right? This glass of water, if I pick it up and I hold it for a minute, no problem at all, right? If I hold it for an hour, my arm might begin to ache a bit. But if I hold it for a whole day, you're probably gonna have to call an ambulance, right? And in each case, the weight of the glass is the same, but the longer I hold it, the more stressful it becomes. Now, I offer this metaphor to help us to see that it's the everyday, mild, maybe even modern stressors that in the short term, we can handle pretty easily. But as with this glass of water, when it lasts for a prolonged period of time, that mild or moderate stress has the potential to become toxic stress, or what we refer to as trauma, right? And the thing about it is that most of us are not holding just one glass, right? Most of us are holding dozens of glasses of water at the same time, right? And so it's the cumulative long-term impact of that stress that's threatening to both our physical and our mental health. Now, this is important because although trauma is considered a psychological condition, it additionally adversely impacts our physical health as well, right? And so these are basically the glasses of water in our lives, right? These are the types of events that don't typically make the headlines, but they are insidious, right? And they can and often do result in trauma, right? So most of us can endure fairly well through a moment of unemployment, right? Or financial straitness, right? We can endure through a moment of chaos or unpredictability, or even social marginalization. But again, it's when these conditions are chronic that they have the potential to be traumatic, right? I'd like to call our attention to racism and microaggressions here. It's listed here because, frankly, like all the others, they too are a stressful and pervasive reality, right? But, many of us here may have, never grown up in a chaotic living environment, for example, right? We may have never suffered through financial straitness or pervasive community violence, or we may have ever experienced multiple losses, right? But I'd venture to say that not all of us, all of us here who are Black have experienced some form of racism, right? And so if, as I mentioned before, trauma or traumatic stress is deleterious to our mental and physical health, and if racism is a traumatic stressor, then it stands to reason that racism is detrimental to our health, right? And according to the Office of Minority Health under the Department of Health and Human Services, in comparison to our white counterparts, Black people are at higher risk for stroke, cancer, asthma, influenza and pneumonia, diabetes, HIV, and the #1 killer of Black people is heart diseases, right? And so I asked myself, why is this, right? Are Black people just more prone than our white counterparts to illness? I certainly don't believe that that's the case, right? I contend that the culprit in the disparity that we see here between us and our white counterparts is, in fact, racism, right? So I'm going to kind of hone in on heart disease, that #1 killer, to connect the dots and help us to see just how racism is a critical causal factor to cardiovascular disease. Okay, so this chart here, it looks at the social determinants of health for cardiovascular disease, right? And I know this, it looks like a lot going on here, but we're going to break it down, all right? So up top here, these green boxes are the various social determinants of health, right? These gray boxes that you see here are essentially the race-based barriers that are associated with each of the social determinants of health, which of course are experienced by Black people at disparate rates. So what we're saying here is that if I look at maybe economic stability, for an example, right? What this chart is showing us is that racism creates these conditions, right? Low income, unemployment, restrictive finances, and so forth and so on. It creates these conditions that threaten my economic stability, right? And so coming down, these light brown boxes are cardiovascular disease risk factors, right? Which stem from each of the race-based barriers. Now, I want us to notice that this is where the toxic stress comes into play, right? So essentially, the barriers that are imposed by racism create significant psychological and physical stress. So what I'm saying here, in other words, that because my economic stability, for example, is blocked due to racism, right, I remain stressed. And then as a consequence, I develop hypertension, hypercholesterolemia, diabetes, and thrombosis, right? Which are all closely related to conditions of cardiovascular disease, right? And then, of course, the end result when those diseases advance is getting some sort of cardiovascular disease, right? And so I really hope we're seeing this, right? I don't want us to miss this, right? Because this, what we're looking at now, what we're walking through is how and why racism is so detrimental to both our mental and our physical health, right? Now, remember that all of the barriers in these gray boxes, they're all due to racism, right? So what I really want to point out and highlight here is that for Black people, every single measure of social health is adversely impacted by racism, right? There's not one social determinant of health that is unimpacted by racism. So now this particular study was exclusive to looking at cardiovascular disease, but of course, cardiovascular disease is not the only downstream consequence of racism, because emerging from the chronic stress of these very same race-based barriers are a host of other risk factors leading to poor health and poor quality of life, which often ultimately leads to an early death, right? And according to a recent study that was published in the Journal of American Medical Association, over a 20-year span, they said that the Black population had get this number, 1.63 million excess deaths, right? And they said that that number represents more than 80 million years of potential life lost, gone, right? We have to understand how our mental and our physical health are deeply and detrimentally impacted by the pernicious effects of racism. So as I kind of wind up here, I want to make one last point before I close, because what I've described to you thus far is the impact of a current day reality, right? Racism is a pervasive reality. And as we saw from the previous slide, it can take a very, very serious toll on our well-being. But Black people don't only carry the trauma burden of our present day experiences of racism. Science has also shown us that we also inherit and carry the trauma of our ancestors as well, right? And this is called transgenerational epigenetic inheritance, right? So essentially what scientists have discovered is that there is a dynamic interplay between our genes and our environment, where that traumatic experiences alter the expression of our DNA, and then the markers of that altered expression are genetically transferred to our offspring. So, folks, this is yet another invisible almost layer of trauma that compounds the trauma of our current day experiences. And it is this epigenetic transfer of historical trauma coupled with the present day experience of racial trauma that leaves us with the legacy of traumatic stress, right? So this concludes my portion of tonight's presentation, and I really hope that I haven't brought you down too much, because as intractable as racism and the impacts of racism may be, there are ways to mitigate these impacts. And so at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Rios, who's going to shed some light on all of this darkness. And he's going to kind of walk us through ways that we can show up in the world for ourselves and for each other in the face of all of this opposition. So with that, I thank you all for listening, and I turn it over to Dr. Rios. Thank you.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much, Dr. Swift. I mean, you so beautifully were able to connect how the systemic issues really stays trapped in our bodies.
Yes.
And which I'm hoping that we could really go into a bit deeper, as well as to what we could do next about it. So, Dr. Swift, again, this is a collaborative effort. So please feel free anytime. Ms. Gregory, what's my time looking like, Greg? How much time am I doing right now?
You're good. You're good.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
So I have about. Okay. Just give me a nod when I'm like, if I'm running too much over time. I'm going to try to make sure I keep it within my time slot. So thank you so much. As was mentioned earlier, my name is Dr. Juan Rios, Associate Professor at Seton Hall University.
Excuse me, Dr. Rios, you know you have your AI on.
Oh, no. Where is it?
It's everything that you're saying. No, your caption.
Everything. Oh, it's okay.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
It's for those who making sure I'm capturing folks who may need to read, that may have challenges listening as well, despite the spaces that we. So that's quite okay. But thank you so much for noting that. As a professor at Seton Hall University, in the Department of Social Work, I want to first begin whenever I start any discussions around health and wellness, it's important to call into our space those who we are living for, whether they're present or not. Mm-hmm. So wherever you are right now, wherever you're sitting in your car or at home, If you have a child, if you have a loved one, if you have parents who or loved ones who are no longer with us, be able to call them into our space, bring them into our space today. So we're holding that energy of starting with love first whenever we think of our own wellness and our collective wellness, and understanding that um, one of the greatest harms that racism has done globally was, with regards to white supremacy, is to deconstruct the power of Black people on a global level. And I want to make sure that we highlight that, because it's been a tactic through every system of oppression to deconstruct Black families, deconstruct communities, deconstruct systems of unity and governments. And we need to call in love first here, so we make sure that we carry that with us. And we're going to really go through this to get today, and I apologize if I'm going a little bit quickly, only so we can really get to conversation and really highlight rather than stay so much stuck in some of the theoretical things that we're going to touch upon first. But really, this is going to be a conversation of introspection. There's going to be lots of questions that I want you to have a pen and pad next to you, or use your phone for notes. So later on, you can go back to it and really answer some of these questions and really think about it in a much more a deeper way. We begin to ask questions about how do we build solidarity, and what is our own practice of resilience. First thing, it's always important to know who I am in regards to the context and from which I am delivering this information. All of us have lived experiences, but it's important that we normalize our own trauma as healers, as we also work within community and work together to heal. Because no one has ever gotten to a point where I have arrived, right? Where now I'm not still dealing with my own trauma. Like this is a lifelong process, and we try to work at it. This is not something in which now, okay, I went to therapy 3 times. You know, Mrs. Deborah mentioned it earlier. You know, you go to therapy a couple of times and then you're like, okay, I'm done. Like, no, therapy is not just being able to speak to someone across the table. Therapy is a continuum of practices that you're doing on a daily basis, that we maintain our mental wellness. It's important to note that I am a father. I come with that space. I'm 20-year-old and have a 3-year-old, and it's a big gap. So pray for me, pray for my back, pray for my health and wellness, because I'm not the same person I was 20 years ago. And that's a reality of how we embrace aging gracefully with love and compassion. I definitely want to highlight the intersections of my identities as well. I do identify as Afro-Latino, Black and Latino, raised by Black grandmother, Black mother. And that's important to note, because that's the lens in which I was raised and seeing harm being done, and how that impacted my mother's mental health in the household in which I lived in. And that's important to note when going back into what Dr. Swift mentioned about the intergenerational harm that racism has done, and how that not only impacts us, but our children and grandchildren, and how are we beginning to show up as our best selves to begin to break those intergenerational traumas that exist. So it's important to start with this question. So if you have a pen and paper next to you, let's get right into it. And if you have ability to chat, talk through the stream, begin to answer this question with maybe one word and say, what does community mean to me? And try to calculate that with one word for a second. And again, we're not going to spend too much time. We're just highlighting this as conversations that we're having with ourselves, so introspection. So begin to hold that. And for some of us, that word is family, safety, acceptance, belongingness. And begin to hold on to write that down somewhere. Because when we think of community, we think of it from a paradigm of the circle of insight. What is our positioning to our own community? And this is really the work of my colleague, Anthony Nicotera, who studied with Thich Nhat Hanh in Vietnam. And I've really adopted this into my practice, that whenever we are looking at the social injustices, both internal and external, that exist, we have to begin to notice, okay? And that may mean that's this introspection piece that we're doing right now. It's taking an inventory of where I am in my life. Where do I find joy? Where do I don't find joy? What are the areas that are pulling me away from happiness and connecting and finding love and finding genuine relationships? Who are they? Naming them, naming what it is that's holding us. And sometimes that means we have to sit in silence and separate ourselves from people who may be taking away that energy from us, from holding that space. It means to reflect, to investigate. What is my story? What is the story that I'm carrying from space to space? And then lastly, doing something about it. And that's the piece that I do not want to discount. That is great to be in reflection. It's great to be sitting in silence and taking our and getting our time. But there's also the work that we have to move through. And that work is a network as well throughout our community. So in order to reach the sense of solidarity, it means that each of us play different roles. And so many of us who are in this work of community transformation and restorative justice, oftentimes we fall into this really bad trap in which we are pinned against each other for the same little pennies of resources and grant money. So it's just who's really doing the work, right? Are the frontline workers, are the storytellers, are the healers, are the builders, the disruptors, those loud voices, those people who are able to construct really great PowerPoints and really great data sheets? Well, the truth is it's all of us. It's all of us that play this important role of solidarity, that we need our grandmothers and grandfathers, storytellers. We need those who have vision. We need the healers and disruptors. We need our caregivers to be present and to be fully present both here and here. And this means that when we meet each other and when harm will happen, I mean, we won't always all agree, but are we meeting each other from a space where our disagreements don't turn into something that it should not go into? That are we utilizing our coming from a loving space first? And I like to highlight this very quickly about the difference between restorative and transformative justice. And that's really when one is built on how do we repair the harm that's done. So think about when, you probably been to work and somebody took something out of your refrigerator, and now, when your lunch out of the work refrigerator, and then it's like, how do I respond to that? Okay. And for what space do I respond to it? When the person says, yeah, you know what, I'm sorry, yes, I did take it. Then what? And the transformative justice piece moves in to say, well, why were they hungry in the first place that caused them to take that lunch from the refrigerator, you see? Now, we have to begin to work from that space, because so often the systems in which we live in do not allow us to look at the deeper roots that has pinned us against each other in our community. And when we look at when the media tells this narrative of violence within the Black community, it's told from a very narrow lens and not the lens of systems like Dr. Swift has discussed. So therefore, it means that I also have to take account into that lens and meet my brother, my sister, my community when there's harm, or when harm has happened, to be able to meet them with the sense of love and hope, compassion, and accountability together. And the next question I want to move into is think about, when do I feel seen in my community? So for many of us, it's, growing up on my block, I knew the guy at the bodega. He knew exactly my order. I knew who I needed to go to when I needed somebody to babysit my daughter downstairs, and I just didn't have somebody. I knew when the mail person, we build our own sense of community that's for us, that's unique to us, that may be non-traditional as to many how white spaces may define it or systems define it. But begin to notice, how do I feel seen and heard? Because within our community spaces, I'm not going to go through this diagram entirely just for the sake of time, but what I want to highlight here is that the beginning of any transformative and or restorative practices means that our effective statements come first. I'm slowing down there for a reason, because our statements that we say to each other when something is happening, it begins to build up, right? It's when we say, hey, good morning, sis, peace, how you doing? You meet each other with love first, rather than looking at someone as posturing against me. And I can remember when I used to get back in the day when I used to party, talk about 25, 30 years ago now, not lately. I would walk into a house party and I'm talking to my friends and I'm like, yeah, we're having a good time. As soon as somebody come in the door that I don't know, I don't see, what begins to happen? Right? Right. Postulate against that person. And all of a sudden, your voice gets 3 octaves lower. And they be like, oh, this is my homeboy, so my friend, James, da da da. Yo, what up? Right? We begin to postulate against each other, man. We begin to size each other up immediately. But 3 minutes beforehand, my voice is all the way up. My octave, like, hey, y'all, how you doing? What's up? What we about to do? All of a sudden, you walk in, now my voice goes 3, 4 octaves lower, right? Because we position, and rather, we are conditioned to postulate and position against our own people first as a threat, because of what has already been ingrained about the media, rather than looking at something that's my family, right? And being embrace that person of, hey, how you doing? Welcome. You know what? There's juice over here, da da da, right? And these affective statements are the protective factors before harm happens later on, because we know that happens on a continuum. That when first I meet you like this, then you already will be like that, right? And then these looks happen to the side. And don't spill something on me or step on my sneaker. Now it's going to be a whole other problem. So what I'm saying here is that how we meet and greet each other with these statements of noticing where I am and embracing each other with a sense of self-awareness and love first is a protective factor towards leading to those other areas of harm that exist later on. And that impacts our collective trauma, because our collective trauma that Dr. Swift mentioned impacts how it increases our rates of conflict. And then all of a sudden, it's like, you know what? I'm not dealing with people, so I hide and I socially isolate. Okay? Because when someone harms you, now you have 2 choices, right? We think of fight or flight, and we begin to isolate this other area. And it impacts our social networks. And the reason I want to say that is because without our social networks, we withdraw the first line of support when it comes to mental health and mental wellness. And we take away that sense of building trust and safety and empowerment that happens. And you know what? When I'm not okay, I trust that when I say that to you, that you're going to meet me with a sense of compassion and not just with a, well, what you got to be sad for? You have a daughter, you have another son, you're married, you have a house, you have all these things. What's wrong with you? Like, yes, count my blessings, and I can live. Life happens to me too. It happens to all of us, and to listen first, and to hear that, because that's when we begin to take a liberated health approach, and that simply is when we're meeting each other, where we're addressing our own internal stuff as well as systemic, that we cannot do one without the other. That if we're looking at healthcare, we can't just work with somebody and talk about, oh, yes, the depression and the harm that's happened as a result of racism and trauma, and then you're voting differently. And then you're voting against the very and you voted for the very system that continue to further perpetuate suppression. It has to be both. And Dr. Swift went so beautifully into the social determinants of health that these areas impact us all in various ways. That education, that healthcare, that our built environments, meaning the community that I choose to create and create around me, also impacts when I choose to go to the doctor and how I'm going to and normalize mental health. Because the statistic that they won't tell you is that Black men between the ages of 16 to 24 are 16 times more likely to be a victim of a violent crime. That's the one they don't tell you. Okay? The one you hear is the harm, but you don't hear that between 16 and 24, 16 times more likely than any population and demographic to be a victim of a violent crime.
Right.
And then holding on to that trauma that has happened. And then we expect them to what? Now, not be impacted? And this is a beautiful quote. I'm a big 90s hip hop fan. So if you don't know that about me, you know that. And I take this from the great philosopher of our time, the Inspector Deck, for the Wu-Tang Clan. He says it beautifully. He's like, living in the world is no different from a cell. Every day I escape from Jake's giving chase, selling bass, smoking bones in my staircase. Though I don't know why I chose to smoke cess, I guess that's the time when I'm not depressed. But here we go, get into this. But I'm still depressed. And I then ask, what's it worth? So in our music and our culture, there has been a constant cry for help and how mental health shows up within music and art. But we gotta listen. Because what we're hearing here is that substance misuse, that depression, that suicidality and suicidal thoughts are there, but yet we don't see it, we don't recognize it as such. We look at it as from, well, what are you not doing? And we begin to disconnect and disassociate with, as was mentioned earlier, through drugs, alcohol, sex, shopping, with those big three. And a way that I want to just continue as we get to close is to think about how does it show up in my body first? Because so often it's always, I'm good, I'm all right, right? I'm good, I'm all right. That's it. I'm all right, I'm good. That's it. But notice, how am I sleeping? How am I really sleeping? When do I begin to have attacks, panic attacks, and feel this constant state of sadness or worry, or you have trouble, difficulty sort of staying focused? And we start there because notice the beginning that trauma is trapped in the body, stored in the body, like Dr. Swift mentioned. And that by beginning to have a practice of loving kindness is in itself an act of resistance. And being able to know that how you talk to yourself, about yourself, when you're by yourself, is something that you want to begin. We all want to begin to pay attention to. Because it determines how am I going to choose to show up in my community. Because if I'm in the state of constant dysregulation, right, where I don't sleep, I'm worried that when I see you and when I meet you, I'm meeting you with that first. And then it's tough. It makes it a lot harder for us to connect. But there's good news here, people. And let's move to that. Is that we know about trauma-informed approach, but we also have to keep in mind about healing-informed approach. And this is when we begin to tap into the resources that we create in our circle that is healing. Meaning, when you build your community, okay, meaning think about the 5 people who are closest to you. Your 5 closest people who are closest to you. And how do they pour into you and you pour into them? Is it from a space that's grounded in healing and attachment, healthy attachment? Is it grounded in our values, our traditions, bringing back our indigenous practices, and knowing that the first line of support really comes from us? And it's also okay to say, you know what, tell your friend, have you spoken to somebody about that? Because that you are not, and let me be clear, you are not expected to be the therapist of your friends, and your friends are not your therapist. Let's be very clear with that. Okay. So what I am telling you is that to meet each other with love and compassion and empathy, but that also means accountability. So when you see that person is not doing okay, it is up to us as accountability partners also to say, you know what, I am seeing somebody right now. This is my practice of opening up, so we normalize it in our own community. And that's how we begin to co-design the future of a space of compassion and healing. So how am I doing that today? And I want you to think about that very quickly. And I promise you, I only got a few more. I want you to think about this and write this down. How am I co-designing? Because as much as we mentioned about these systems, we have microsystems and micro networks that we work within ourselves. That can help us within the support that we need. And that means that sometimes we need to see ourselves in the future that we may never have thought about seeing ourselves. When I was 18 years old, 17 years old, I never thought I'd see 21, let alone 45, let alone aging with graceful. So being able to envision ourselves that it's possible to break those narratives that our mortality rates are X, that we will be a statistic. Begin to know and embrace that when I say to myself about myself, that I am also deserving to have a life of grace and love and longevity. And also letting go of those things that you no longer serves you. So recognizing what have I outgrown and who am I growing into? And whose am I growing into? That's another topic for another day. But y'all, that's another day. And then recognizing I am at my best when. So when we see each other, that maybe it's the best time to have this conversation. Let me make sure I get my 8 hours. Let me make sure I drink my enough water today. Maybe make sure that I pray this morning or journal this morning. And being able to self-reflect constantly and do a self-inventory of where you are in life and expressing gratitude. Every morning being grateful, writing down 3 things that I'm grateful for. And don't just say life, hope, and strength. Say, I'm grateful for smiling today. I'm grateful for the ability to drive my car to work. I'm grateful for the ability to be in the space with people who hear me right now in this space and see me. Having a spiritual walk of faith. Talk to someone you trust. Being compassionate to yourself. Being kinder to yourself. It's so often, like, we do it. I did this morning, right? I left the house. I left my kids. And, oh, man, I'm so stupid. Like, wait, am I stupid? Or did I make a mistake? Or that was an accident, right? But why are we calling ourselves stupid? Be very careful about the power of words. So that way, when we look at these challenges that exist in our life, these monoliths, these barriers, that we also have to tilt our heads sometimes and notice that there is beauty also in the challenges that we have faced in life. That everything is for beautiful purpose that makes us greater, stronger, more resilient to break these chains of intergenerational harm that has existed so we could create and design new communities. I want to leave with y'all a few things. Dr. Swift mentioned a lot of Reslam Manikin's work, My Grandmother's Hands. You've got an opportunity to read that text, read it. Body Keeps the Score, phenomenal work. I'm going to pause here. I'll be happy to share the slides for anyone who just wants to go back to some of these questions. and also some of the text recommendations. Thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity, and let's move into some conversation.
So there's nothing else to say. Drop the mic, okay?
Right.
Between the two of you, drop the mic.
Yes.
I guess this. So that's it. um, I am so very, very grateful for your presentation. Wow. You said okay, so you got to the root and the heart of the matter of our dysfunction. You told us to start with love and call in love first, to embrace aging and love gracefully, with love and do it gracefully, limit media consumption. You said that. So I think that what I would like to do is to encourage people, to encourage our listeners and our viewers, to go back and read this, because when you said, Dr. Rios, when you said tilt your head, and you do tilt your head, you see something completely different than when you look straight on, right? That slide it says it all. Um, I thank you both. And I am speechless. There's nothing else to say. You covered our issues in a very thorough way. So to the audience, this is why I read their bios and I said, we need professionals. So we've just gotten professional help. And if there is a need for more, I can give your information out. But wow, that's all I can say between the two of you. Wow. You are you all like taking this on the road or something? Because
I
it's
would love to. Look, I've been a big fan of Dr. Swift for a long time before she even knew who I was. So
I
listen,
was going to say, I've been trying to connect with Dr. Rios for a minute now. So I'm hoping that we can connect and collaborate. And I thank you for what you shared, your presentation. For me, it was next level, right? It was how, we're talking about trauma, the conversation is there, but, moving that conversation towards transformation or restoration and transformation and healing, right? That's the next level. And liberation. I loved how you incorporated the liberatory aspect of it as well. That's the next level stuff that we have to get to. And I am in appreciation of what you shared tonight. And so I thank you for all of that. Yeah.
so
And I look
the only response, the one response that I received is, we have to have a part two. We have to have a part two. I thank you so very, very much. And like I said, I'm going to leave the final word with the two of you. The one thing that I would like to do is to take a moment of silence for all of the families who are grieving loss, for our own personal loss, for the dysfunction that you talked about, the unity, the disconnect rather, that you talked about when you gave your presentation. I would just like to take a moment of silence for us to release that out of ourselves, at least for this moment. Thank you. Thank you so much. And to our audience, we hope that you have gotten some tools and some tips to navigate within your own circle and within our community. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Yes, good night all.